Good morning. Why don't we start with our Revenue Authority?
Revenue Authority is always an interesting division to start with because you're not doing an appropriation. You're saying yes to projects. The projects before you have all been brought before. There are two projects that deal with acquisition around the air park, which was recommended when the FAA looked at things that could be obstacles to planes. These were the last in the priorities of property that could be bought. Now, the two projects are completely dependent upon FAA appropriations, which, to tell you the truth, are not actually expected, since these items in the federal budget are proposed for cutting, and it doesn't look like there'll be funds for it. In any event, the two projects are in priority order. The Leet Melbrook property would create the lesser of the impacts and would be appropriate if there are funds for it. The merchant tire is a little bit more interesting because, of course, it's a decent business going on, and the only reason that it could be an obstacle is because high trucks park in their parking lot. So the building itself is out of being an obstruction, but the trucks that service the business may be an obstruction sometimes. So that makes it a lesser priority. Those are the two air park acquisition projects. If you have any questions on that before we go forward with the third one.
Okay, now you said that they're in priority order,
They are.
but the first two are contingent upon federal funding?
That's correct, both
Okay.
of them.
And when do you find out about the federal funding? Morning, Keith.
Morning. Keith Miller, CEO of the Revenue Authority. The funding, and really what the delay is right now is that, as Jeff just referenced, the situation here is when there is an 18-wheeler making a delivery to the properties. So we have gone a couple of times to the FAA and trying to find a workaround for this project, because the last thing we want to do is be relocating businesses based on this. And the most recent delay in funding is that we do think that we have a potential workaround. And so the FAA has agreed to give us 2 years to try and figure that workaround out. It'll take 2 years just to get through the federal process.
Okay.
And that's why the project has been kind of delayed here. And Jeff also referenced, too, you also have some funding issues with the FAA, so we're always dependent upon that. Just that the committee knows is that the FAA funds 90% of the project. That's why we're dependent upon them to do that. Okay?
Okay, the last one is a little bit more interesting. It used to be known as the Poolsville Economic Development Project. We just received a revised PDF.
Cross-fines.
Cross-funds. I don't know if that's good or bad. Don't you want your vine straight up? I have no idea. What do I know? Which is what my wife tells me every time I have a recommendation. But in this case, there was a project last year that was approved by the council. What is proposed is really a $1.8 million increase to the project. They've spent $400,000 in FY20, or you're going to spend it, whatever it is. And the increased cost is really due to additional parking and stormwater management. There is also some debt service associated with this, mainly because the county agreed in a separate item to sort of fund this, and they expect to be paid back from revenue. So this is a little bit unusual. The debt service schedule is also at your place, so that would be approved in operating. As far as the Revenue Authority is concerned, that it will be revenue neutral to them. They'll have the revenue to pay back this amount and operating costs going forward. But in
Okay.
terms of scope, it's absolutely the same. Did the number of parking
Keith, let's
spaces
get
increase?
give us the plain language story here. I'm excited about this. I've heard about it a lot, but let's recap on the vision here.
Yeah, so just so we kind of back up maybe a little bit, is that the project has kind of gone through several different phases, as everybody's aware here. The project itself, if you want me to recap, is an educational vineyard, an event facility, and a custom crush facility. And really the goals here is support agriculture, support business development, and support education and workforce development. And what we've done, and as the project is kind of really the last time we were here, we were going through a design build concept. We got through like the first phase of the design build and realized that wasn't going to work out too well.
Why is that?
We lost too much control on the design side of things when you're kind of framing things out. On that design build, the goal there is that you kind of turn over the reins to the contractor to do the design. And if you want to kind of have a little bit more voice in that, you need to give them more information up, so you find yourself doing more of the design work itself. So that's when we pulled back and said, let's get back in control of this and go through a traditional design and build model. So where we are right now is we've gone through the preliminary design on the property. We have, and during that, as Jeff was alluding to, during that design portion, we went out and had estimates returned to us. Basically, all the budgeted numbers came back pretty well online, except for the parking lot and stormwater management. So there's an existing parking lot on the property. However, we do need to modify that parking lot, and once you start modifying a parking lot, stormwater management regulations kick in, and that's
Can't
really
use
what.
dirt? Can't use gravel?
There is going to be some overflow area there
Yeah.
as well, but we have to treat the areas that are being modified. So we're working through that scope right now. And that really is what really kind of laid the change down in where we are. I did want to highlight, though, if I could back up just a second, I did want to highlight some positives, because this project's been in the pipeline for a while. The first quarter acre of vines is planted and growing out there.
Okay.
It is in a partnership with the University of Maryland, so we're doing research on the type of vines that will be successful in growing in the Ag Reserve right here in Montgomery County.
Right.
I'm happy to report that according to Dr. Joe Fiola from University of Maryland, that this has been the best planting and he has seen in the last 2 years.
Okay.
So that's a real good positive for us, and I think for those in the Ag Reserve and what can be grown out there, it's interesting in that standpoint. We have completed a memo of understanding between us, Montgomery College, and Grow and Fortify. Grow and Fortify represents the wine industry, beer industry, and spirits industry in the state. So we have a memo of understanding there where we're developing certificate programs now. They're going to be offered through Montgomery College.
Nice.
And we're working forward on that. And from a bigger picture,
Certificate of
viticulture and oenology. So the first phase would be viticulture, because we want to get the classes going so that as we're doing, the vision here is that we'll plant about a quarter acre of vines every year. So we want students to get involved in this program so that we can get them out there planting with us and maintaining with us. That's the whole goal here is that we're teaching them. The first quarter acre was done so that our staff could understand what we have to do, right, to maintain. And so that's what really kind of the goal is on that standpoint. And from a bigger picture, University of Maryland has started the first fermentation degree classes this past fall. So they're implementing the fermentation program, which after meeting with Dr. Baruti, who is the head of agriculture in the University of Maryland College Park, that's where he believed that the educational program from the higher institution would be in order to support a project like this, as well as a lot of other things. So we're happy to report those classes have already started. So the goals early on in the project was to support education that would help stir the wine industry, and those we're making progress, even though the building hasn't built and the facility isn't built yet. and then bringing it back around. So where we are now is that the timeline is to be finished with design by this spring, groundbreaking this fall, and opening in calendar year, what is this, 21, so which would be fiscal 22, as far as the council.
And imagine the revenue comes from the custom crush facility.
The custom crush and event facility is the
And
biggest
event-
revenue.
and
Yeah,
event
that's really,
facility.
that's how the model works.
Oh.
And so, as we're talking about here with the debt service, during those initial upstart years, so the Revenue Authority has agreed to really the startup money. So we're estimating about $1.6 million to $2 million of Revenue Authority funds being able to handle the first couple of years of actual losses
Right.
on the property, as well as the startup costs with that. The county pays the debt service for the first several years until the facility ramps up, and then after it becomes cash positive, there's a repayment of a percentage of that back to the county. So all in, the projections, about $1.9 million to the county, about $7 million from operations, and we've got $3 million from the state.
Okay.
So that's kind of where all the funding model comes together.
And as far as the users of the crushed facility, I imagine that's quite regional.
Yes. It'll be a regional, priority, local, and then a regional reach. It'll most likely. The goal here is that as this grows, from our ag reserve, if you're doing, University of Maryland is doing research right here in the ag reserve, we're showing the local farmers what can be successfully grown in our ag reserve. And then with the custom crush facility and the local production facility right there in Poolsville, the goal is that some of the farmers take some of the unused land on their farm and create
Right,
vineyards.
because now you
and
don't
start
have to
expand.
buy that equipment yourself. And
Correct.
so it becomes more economical
them.
to put some of your acreage into, I mean, yeah, okay.
Yes, and
You
that's
can
it.
be your own winemaker now, potentially. You'd have to hire and you'd have to have the expertise.
Correct. But you would come in and use the facility, bring the finished product back to your winery where you have grapes, and you're able to do that.
But I also think, as I was told, that the event aspect of this is also a significant revenue generator.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, that's the event facility is needed to support the whole
Okay.
vision.
It's a-
That's
it's a
really
piece
what
of the
supports
puzzle.
the vision. Yes.
And, okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, this is, great progress, and I'm excited about it. There's so many benefits here, but certainly one of them is supporting the growth of winemaking in the Ag Reserve. It's a burgeoning sector. We've got some incredible winemakers who have started, operations in the county, and there's a lot of potential here. So this is going to be something that furthers that along, and really commend the county executive for supporting this funding. It's a great recommendation, and thanks for all of your work, Keith.
Great.
Mr. Rice, welcome to the PHED Committee.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And as we see a lot of overlap between education and culture and planning, housing, economic development, I think we're going to see a lot more of this throughout the coming years. Let me just say, Mr. Miller, that I'm incredibly pleased to see the progress in this and where we've gone. Both the chair and I were just at Montgomery College a few days ago to celebrate a very unique signing between George Mason University and Montgomery College when it came to cloud computing and a cloud computing degree. And this is one in which I think we could be looking at doing the reverse. And so while I know you are not the head of our academic institution, it certainly is one in which I think that we need to explore the opportunities that may exist for us to offer this, because we see so many of our Northern Virginia partners who have heavily invested in wineries, to certainly offer this program to them just as they did with us,
Oh, yeah.
and
Interesting.
certainly have the turnabout in terms
That's
of
clever.
yeah, exactly, right? So I think that there's a lot of potential that's there. I know that the universities at Shady Grove is certainly a partner as well. I serve on their board of advisors there, and so we're very happy to see the degree in agritourism and the potential for another four-year degree when it comes to something along the lines of enology or the viticulture 2.0, if you will. So certainly we'll be looking forward to working with you as well as with the Revenue Authority to kind of make those things truly come to fruition. But I think that overall, this is a great project, and it represents something now that I actually live in the Ag Reserve. It's something that, and live across the street from Windridge Vineyards winery
really?
that's doing amazing. They every single evening and every single weekend, and now they've got the brand new building. So, Mr. Zients, to your point, they're constructing a building right now, an event facility that is going to be tremendous. I know that I've already locked in for my daughter's graduation party to be there. So you're
And
right.
The after party will be at your house.
There it is, exactly. So when it comes to the amount of revenue that certainly comes in from projects like this, there is no question that the opportunities are endless. And so really want to thank you. I remember when you just started talking about this vision a long time ago, and to see it come to where it is now is just tremendous. So just really want to say thank you, Mr. Miller, for your great work. You were the spearhead in all of this and making this happen. So really want to thank you for your commitment to the Agricultural Reserve and to our winery industry.
Super. That's exciting. Well, and the malt house hasn't panned out yet?
So I wouldn't say no yet.
Okay.
What we have is we have a design that is ready, a slight modification to design that if we have the money in the budget as we finalize the project and to buy that equipment, we can make a slight modification to the design and accommodate it. So we're still
Okay.
trying to get there.
Okay.
But we just want to get the primary project built, and we'll be right there.
So you don't need to know the answer on that just yet now? That's something you can decide in
Yes.
another year or so, or something like that?
Yeah, it's a slight modification, we'll be able to do it. And that's
Okay.
what we're working with the design team
We'll
on.
be waiting for your proposal on that.
Hopefully.
We're not giving up on that one.
No,
Okay,
not at all.
good. All right.
Do I read that as 3-0 approval?
I think my colleagues are on board.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. All right, now, back to the main show. Parks.
I feel better once I spend money. I have a smile. There you go. I have the thick one here. Is that the one? Is that
Yeah.
what you're talking about?
Yeah. I've got mine. He usually uses his digital. He's that kind of guy. He's a digital guy.
He's hip, he's cool.
All right. All right. So, Pam, nice to talk to you again. It's been about 12 hours. You want to take us back to where we were?
I will.
Is that the right way to proceed?
That is. Thank you. Good morning. Yeah, we were here a week ago. We were covering the Parks CIP. The staff report for last time covered all the projects. It laid things out in the order of, new projects, projects that were requesting a change, and then there's a section on consent, projects that have very little change. Predominantly, they're adding 2 more years of funding in most cases, but no change in scope. And then there's the list in the last section that lists the projects that are unfunded. But where we ended last time was at the bottom of page 17. We're starting today at the top of page 18 of the staff report for last week, which was April
Pilar.
24th. And the project that we were going to start reviewing today would be the PLAR, the Planned Life Cycle Asset Replacement for non-local parks and minor renovations. The request for this one, the reason why this one is noted in this section as a change, is that there's been a suggested modification to it just in reference to the CE's budget target, and it would reduce its request from November back to its current funding level, and this affects the current revenue side of the affordability PDF. If you recall, the affordability PDF makes a recommendation to meet a certain target for cutting GO bond funding and another certain target for meeting current revenue funding. The current revenue side of it's quite small, but this is one of the two projects that will address that need to meet that target. And what it does is, when Parks submitted their budget in November, they had asked for an increase for this project. This just takes them back to current funding levels.
Okay. Sounds fine.
Okay. The next project you'll see is the pollution prevention and repairs to ponds and lakes. And as you might recall, at the opening of the last work session, we talked about the Water Quality Protection Fund, the long-term financing from the state. That process is still in discussion and ongoing. In the last week, we haven't quite come to yet complete resolution to that, but I do know that there is work being done on that. And this is one of those projects that is impacted by that long-term financing.
Okay, so if we don't show the money, then it is somehow, a factor in negotiations over whether we can bond the Water Quality Protection Fund?
Well, I just want to call to your attention, we're going to go to the T&E work session this afternoon on the DEP's stormwater program, but we're concerned about whether or not the state revolving fund actually is workable, both whether or not we can get the money, even in the threshold question, whether we're eligible and we can work out the ability to secure the debt, and even beyond that, whether or not the amount of staff time that we have to put into documenting what's necessary to qualify basically effectively makes it unattractive from a cost point of view. So that's probably more of a T&E issue, but I just want to make you aware of it, that this has become a lot more complicated than I think anyone anticipated 2 years ago.
Yeah, this is something that we've been working through. I think when, you may remember several years ago, we used to issue water quality protection bonds, but then we found out about a state loan program that was significantly cheaper. And so we moved to doing that as the financing source for stormwater activities. Then in the meantime, there was an interest in pulling in some of the parks projects for that as well. But we didn't want to do a bond issue that's for very small, because that gets very inefficient. It's also very costly for a small amount of money. And now, as we've had some experience trying to work through the mechanics of the loans, we've run into some snags. We're still trying to work them through. But Casey is correct. We don't really know right now where we are with that. And so we're looking at a number of different options. And I think I would say that we're looking at short-term options and longer-term options. The easiest thing for everybody is to just cash fund, but that means the rate goes up potentially by a lot. So we have to look at those issues, and we're in the process of doing that. But it's involved a lot of coordination, and it is a detailed process.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Well, and we're pretty sure that expenditure is going to rise to 1.2 million. Why does it rise from 1 to 1.2?
What do you think he means? Between these 2 years, next 2 years?
Starting in '23.
I'm looking at the table on page 18. Good morning, Carl.
Yeah, Andy, come up.
Good morning, Andy Frank, head up the Park Development Division. The funding allocation in that program is based on a new Maryland Department of the Environment MS4 permit that Parks has acquired, and we're in the process of looking through our retrofit requirements along with our general water quality program throughout the Stream Valley parks, and that's a projected amount that we would need in order to fund projects that we feel are going to be ongoing in order to do restoration in the Stream Valley Park system.
Okay. So this particular line item is related to the restoration of stream valleys?
Yes, that's the.
Because I thought it was ponds and lakes, but.
But the pollution prevention, I'm sorry, the pollution prevention, it does both our active use areas as well as some Stream Valley parks. That's countywide. It's related to stormwater retrofits that are under the same water quality program through MS4.
Okay. Will?
Yeah, and I was going to ask a similar question in a couple other spots where there's just seems to be kind of a little uptick, and I know costs thing you're anticipating costs rising. I'm assuming that's what it is, but to the extent that that could be addressed, where that happens going forward, because just it is an increase. It goes, so we need to just be aware of that, and if you could, as we go through the rest of the pack, you can talk about it now, but it would be helpful to just know what's behind that.
And this one is a specific regulatory requirement, but a number of these level of efforts are nowhere near where they should be. And so it's you could say, well, why is it, $100,000 more this year than it was last year, or $200,000? It probably should be $500,000 more or $1 million more. We realistically can't fund these where we want them to be. That's why we've walled them off when we made the non-recommended cuts and tried to protect those really at the expense of the big standalone items. But almost every single one of these where you're talking about historic structures or PLR or trails or whatever really should be much higher. And I think we're just trying to fit in what we can fit in.
Trying to get to the high level as fast as you can, but
It's
you
more of
can't
a
get there.
backlog issue than an inflation issue when you see these bump
Right.
ups. It means that we've measured something like the life cycle replacement of playgrounds or courts, and we're not anywhere near the desired interval. We're at 40 years instead of 20 years. So the incremental rise is to try to get more in line with what we believe is the appropriate life cycle replacement.
That's helpful. Thank you.
All right,
One
so
thing I probably
Mary
should.
Beck, Mike, Casey, Carl, Andy. Brett Magellan.
Yes.
Plan
One
B.
thing I probably should have mentioned is that I think, given the complexity of what we've been talking about with trying to work out whether the loan works or cash works, likely these couple of projects that have the water quality money will probably need to be tabled and taken up in the operating budget context, because then we'll have the complete picture.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Let's keep going.
Okay, so if you'll turn onto page top of 19, this is the restoration of historic structures, which is also similar to the one we just covered under the Peeler minor renovation. It's the other project, the second of the two, that will be returned to the current funding level to address the affordability reconciliation PDF.
All right. Sounds fine. Any objections on historic structures? No. All right.
The next one you'll see is the small grant donor assisted capital improvements PDF. It has an increase in appropriation from $300,000 a year to $1.1 million to accommodate increased support from projects that are non-county government funding sources
Can
and the
I,
addition of 2 fiscal years.
Sorry, quick update. What is the current status of Jessup Blair House? I believe you've done a lot of work there already.
Yep, the house has been stabilized. The interior is pretty much gutted, but it's stabilized, it's conditioned. We don't, at this point, have a project in place to ultimately restore it and occupy it, but we're exploring different options.
So there's another layer of expenditures needed to have
Yes.
it be occupiable.
Yes.
I see. Okay. All right. Sorry, back to small grant donor assisted capital improvements. So these are matching funds, basically? Is that what it is, or? how would you-
This is good news. This is where we get a state bond bill or a donation, and so we don't have to come up and get the appropriation from you and go through the supplemental process.
I
This
see.
gives us the authorization to spend money, non-tax supported money that comes in from non-county sources, I should say.
So the source of revenue in these is not county?
Correct.
Okay.
There's a little bit of current revenue from both general current revenue from the county as well as MNC PPC that deals with some administrative costs. But this increase here was just the contributions appropriation, so it's actually allowing us to have appropriation to receive other people's money, basically.
Gotcha. All right. Good. We like other people's money.
Okay, moving along. We are on page 20. We are at the stream protection, Stream Valley Park PDF, and this is just similar to the pollution PDF we just spoke about. It is the second of those two that are affected by the long-term financing from the loan from MDE, and that's being worked on, that we're going to hold off completely until the closer to the operating budget.
Okay, so you're adding 2 fiscal years at the end because they
Correct.
weren't there otherwise holding. All right.
The next is the Trails Hard Surface Renovation PDF. It does have a slight increase to accelerate more work on the project. We did receive some testimony in general related to trails, whether they be natural surface or hard surface trails. It is one of the most used park facilities, are the trail
It
system.
is. It is. And, you know, they're crowded. There's a lot of people on them. And I wonder we have a very, very modest budget for something that is a countywide parks. If you look at it in terms of what it really is, yeah, it's a countywide park that we spend such a small amount of money upgrading. And you know, when you're on these trails and you encounter long stretches of, you know, water intruding over in mud and slippery conditions, it has a big impact on your experience there. Why are we? Feels like we could do a lot more. So can you talk to me about what we're doing here and what you think? You know, what's the need level, and are you doing some work to envision how to expand our hard surface trails? We're going to get to the natural surface trails in a minute, but
Yeah, I would anticipate in the next CIP we'll have a major capital project or two that's focused on new mileage of hard surface trails. But we're renovating Rock Creek, for example, piece by piece. We've gone to, and Andy and others have worked on a strategy that's more about, which if you'd like to hear about it, I can tell you a little bit more about doing some of the engineering in the field to make sure that it's a more efficient way to accomplish these renovations. Some of that is, you can see that in place in that area through Kensington where the Rock Creek Trail runs. We've got really not only resurfaced them, but also improved the drainage, the substrate, and some of what they've done to try to make it more durable and also less susceptible to the things you're talking about water coming over the trail and freezing. But it's, again, another one of these things where we really should be spending a lot more money, but we know that we have budget issues. So we certainly could use whatever money you can make available for that one, along with some of these others like natural surface trails, urban park elements, PLR. Those things are all things that we could certainly put more money to use to try to catch up.
okay. Andy, you want to share some information about the kind of work you do with the hard surface trails budget?
Sure. As Casey mentioned, we have a tremendous existing trail system, and it is aging. And as you notice, there's most of these are run along our Stream Valley Park, so they do tend to get affected by larger storm events, also the sedimentation throughout the Stream Valley Park system, which is a natural function.
Right.
And as Casey mentioned, what we've been working on is trying to do a more cost-effective approach, because if you've been out there, you can tell it's just a matter of inches between a dry trail and a wet, muddy trail. And that's very difficult to pick up through the design, survey and design. So what we've been doing is working with our in-house partners as well as contractors to do, as Casey mentioned, field engineering, so that we can, make more efficient use of our money to putting the pavement down, and also dealing with drainage issues at the same time and restoring some of the Stream Valley parks at the same time.
Right.
So it's a collective effort. As Casey mentioned, we made a lot of progress over in the Rock Creek area, and this spring and summer we're going to focus our efforts in Long Branch, which is an area that has some much-needed trail improvements. But we're going to
Great.
try and do it very similarly and as cost-effective as we can, but
I mean, I wonder if you added up all the people who are on a hard surface trail on a weekend in April, May, all the way through, I mean, frankly, almost every weekend, but there's an explosion when the weather changes. And then thought about that as if this was a park, what would we be spending to ensure a quality experience?
Well, it's the, trails, natural surface and hard surface are the number 1 and 3 most
Right.
requested amenity in our
Is that right? Hard surface and natural, 1 and
in
3?
our surveys.
Yeah.
And I'd also point out, it's not just that we had some people supporting trails. I think over half of the people who testified on parks at CIP hearings were specifically testifying in favor of trails. Hard
Right.
surface, natural surface, and then there were a number of people who also are interested in the tunnel. But
Right.
I believe over half of them specifically mentioned they'd like to see more attention on the trails.
More investment in the trails. Feels like we ought to try to respond to what the people are asking for here. Go to my colleagues. Andrew.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you said that. I think, the most compelling aspect, I think, of the public testimony that we received was how consistent it was that folks were asking for increased funding and support for trails and also the Capitol Crescent Trail Tunnel. I mean, I don't think that there was any more than schools, more than anything else. That was what we heard the most from, and it was not concentrated in any one particular part of the county. It was a county-wide, clear message of how much of a need there is and how much interest there is in funding and supporting and keeping up to pace our natural and hard surface trails. So I just wanted to note that, in addition to obviously the tunnel, which we received tremendous amount of testimony countywide, not just, there's this misconception that, that's a Bethesda thing or a Chevy Chase and Bethesda thing, but it's a countywide thing. I did want to just, related to this, because I share the view that we should try to respond to what the obvious interests of the public is as best as we can in, tight financial constraints that we face. But could you just give a quick update on the PEPCO shared use trail?
Yeah, as you know, we built the first 6+ miles from South Germantown down to, I think, the Muddy Branch. And we're right now looking at what the schedule will be to try to finish it all the way down to Cabin John. So that's pretty exciting. We still have an uninterrupted trail corridor all the way from South Germantown to Bethesda, about 13 miles or so. The bottom half is a little more challenging with some of the topography, but it can certainly be done. It would probably take our trail crews about 6 months of putting everything else aside and just to try to bang out that bottom half, but we think that that's probably justified, even though we'd have to put everything else on hold for a little while. Then the next step beyond that would be PEPCO is committed to allow another trail, a paved trail, which we'd like to try to, and that may be one of the things that we propose to you in the next CIP is to pave the whole corridor. We're trying to figure out what the big trail, hard surface trail idea would be to try to advance in 2
So the hard trail would be a standalone CIP item.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it would cost, but, those things tend to be like $1 million a mile, so it would be a big standalone project.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I think that, there's a lot of interest in that. Having trails that connect the county, county-wide, or as close to county-wide as possible, going north, south, and east, west. That's where the magic, to me, really is. That's what makes trails not just recreational opportunities, which are important, but key parts of our transportation infrastructure. And if you compare it to other aspects of our transportation infrastructure, it's actually quite cheap,
Right.
and inexpensive. And I really do see our trail network and our park system as a core part of the desirability and quality of life in Montgomery County. So please keep us informed of the progress there, because that is a really exciting development that I hope we can continue to pursue, and just share the views that were expressed earlier, that there was tremendous amount of interest and engagement from community members who testified at the public hearing on funding for our trail network along with the tunnel. Thanks.
Okay, well, I mean, I think we ought to try to do better than what is in the budget. I will go to my colleague, Will, and then I'll come back to me and I'll make a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agreed that our trails are a great amenity. One of the things that has stuck out to me, though, and I wanted to ask, do we have, and have you recently taken any kind of demographic data about who's using our trails as far as the diversity or where people are from, racial, ethnic, et cetera?
We haven't tried to measure demographics, but we do have trail counters, and we've been doing some intercept surveys as part of the e-scooter and e-bike program to try to get a little bit deeper into information. I don't think we're collecting race, ethnicity, that sort of thing. We are certainly acutely aware of we're always talking internally about making sure that the investment in trails and everything else is in the equity areas to the maximum extent possible, wherever that,
Right.
makes sense as far
Sure.
as, and we've opened up, for example, new trails on the Northwest Branch. Your chief of staff's husband's Boy Scout troop, and I personally went out and worked on that
Yep.
trail. But that's an example of we're trying to get better level of service for trails, specifically in the southeast part of the county. The northwest part of the county around South Germantown, extending all around there, is really the hub of a lot of the existing trail network. We want to not only create opportunities for more equitable access, but also the fact that you shouldn't really have to drive 20 miles
Right,
to get on a
one.
trail.
Yeah.
So we want those to be accessible to people in the down county, and specifically to sort of fill in those gaps in the Tacoma, Silver Spring area.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, and Mike, you can respond, but.
Yeah, I think you ask a great question, and we'll look a little harder about how we can really look at our customers in the trail programs. I can tell you anecdotally, as a trail user, a heavy jogger, both the natural and hards.
This is a drill.
Okay.
our residents in terms of race and ethnicity, age, gender, ability, and also in diversity of why they're there. Are they there to exercise, aggressive biking or jogging? Are they there to enjoy nature? Are they there just to walk and meet their neighbors? So anecdotally, I can tell you my belief is as far as the equity agenda of the council, our trails are as important as amenity as anything we provide, right up there with the playgrounds and the other facilities that are community anchors that people can just enjoy on their own time and their own leisure.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike. And I think if we can think about ways to build on that so it's not anecdotal, and I would agree with you that there are some people getting great use, but I feel this way about libraries too. You have some people that are in the know, that are using the heck out of it and getting great value, and then you have some people that are just completely in the dark and that are not even scratching the surface of what's available. And part of that is outreach, but part of it's also just knowing who's coming in and why they're there. And if we could think about, longer term, maybe it's an operating budget or something you can already do about how to measure that. And I think that would be helpful for me in thinking about, what and consistent with our equity goals about what we're going to do. Because, my colleague's going to make a proposal to double this or do something. And I'm all for it. But we have a lot of need, right, in a lot of places, and there's one pot of money, or in the case, there's one CIP and there's, one operating budget, and they're tough decisions, and I think that type of information would make it easier for me to, be very supportive of something like that.
Well, it's funny you mention this, because in our operating budget, we're proposing a new position for an equity analyst who will be responsible for studying exactly the kinds of things you're talking about. Right. So it's as though you've channeled our...
And I'll be very supportive of that, because I think the parks it's in a similar boat, but like you said, it's a great service. It's one of the reasons Montgomery County is so great, but we want to make sure that we know what's happening and how do we get it to more people here, and then also build the case for increased funding, which is, I know, what we're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would love to see access to trails physically. How does that vary around the county? The ability of a person to go visit a trail, I think, is somewhat based on geography and awareness, and whether you've ever been on, whether you go on a hike is probably a function of whether you've been on a hike. And so these things are all related to what the schools do and what kind of after-school programming we have, and the community centers, and just it's multifaceted. So, I think it would be terrific for parks and the commission to really take an expansive view of the trail system as a whole and see how we can take this to the next level. I think our investment in trails generally relative to the use and the need and the opportunity is there's just a huge mismatch. I think it's based on a status quo vision, essentially, of what we could be doing. And, to Andrew's comment from a moment ago, the idea ought to be just a few minutes from wherever you live in the county, you can enter a trail, and you could stay on a trail, the whole day. You never would have to turn around, because you could just connect and keep going, and you could be interconnected from Long Branch to Damascus, and then back. And
our vision is constrained only by the money.
Yeah.
If you give us the money, we will deliver the vision and the trail network.
Yeah.
No problem.
Great.
So very briefly, and I really want to thank you for allowing me to comment on this, because your last point, Mr. Chair, is incredibly important. So when we're looking at the partnerships in terms of how we do this, we know that our school systems represent the diversity in our community. And so reaching out and partnering with our school systems to educate our families and community about the park system that exists, about the trails that are there, it's tremendously important. But I did just want to comment on one other piece, and you have it listed here in the packet, but it's not lifted up enough, is ADA accessibility. And that is one of the things, when you transform Black Hills, there are blogs that talk about how accessible Black Hills now is. And so folks are talking about this. So to your point, once it gets on the radar screen and people start to hear and understand what's there and the commitment and investment that we put in, it speaks volumes and it has tremendous value. And so there are lots of people who know and come to Black Hills just because they know that it's accessible, and other people have talked about how it's accessible. And so that accessibility piece that goes into, so again, as a non-voting member of this committee, but as a voting member of the General Council, would completely support additional money. Got it in.
You got it in right under the wire. That's
The requested change is that it is increased by 200,000 in FYs 21 and 22, so that it will be 700,000 in FY 21 and 22, and then in the remaining 4 years of the CIP, it will remain at 500,000. And then if we turn to page 28, because we're on trails, and we want to continue talking about them, and they come as a group. The natural surface trails, the recommendation is that for each year of the CIP, the amount funded is $500,000.
Terrific. Thank you.
If we want to slip back then quickly
Go ahead.
to.
Pam, just real
Yeah,
quick.
I'm sorry.
I'm supportive of the first two and not the third.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. We'll take you out hiking this summer, and we'll turn you around.
If we want to turn back to page 22, we are almost then finished with all the projects that there is a recommended review of due to some significant change. The last one is Wheaton Regional Park. This one's included because there has been a slight modification to it due to the reconciliation PDF. But for this project, that change is actually in a positive direction. It uses some of the program open space money that has been freed up as an impact to another project. And this project is within the 6-year budget.
All right.
And then we do have the projects that I had put in the consent. As I said, almost all of these, it's really adding 2 years. It doesn't change the funding level. It just adds the same amount funded each year. It adds the 2 more years to the new CIP.
Okay, so we've got ADA compliance are the first 2 items. Then we've got ALARF,
Level
which
funding.
that's a acquisition, right? Then we've got the,
We now have, and so this one I included in consent because at the time I was writing the staff report, I wasn't aware that it was a brand-new project. So this one is one that we did talk about when we had our work session last week, and there was some discussion about removing it as it's not being recommended for funding at this time. And I
Yeah.
wanted to know if the committee wanted to go ahead and make that recommendation
I
one
would
way
be
or the other.
comfortable with removing it and, inviting parks to come back in the future if they want to recommend a project here. But without any funding, seems strange to have it in the budget. So if my colleagues don't object to that.
Which one is this? This is the.
This is the Little Falls Crossing.
We discussed it a little bit last time.
We did.
Yeah, I'm fine with
The top of page 24.
All right. It just basically, it's got it, we'll delete it, and if Parks wants to come back with a plan that they want to fund, then we'll await that. But no point in leaving it in the budget, raising uncertainty as to what the next step of the process is. The next step of the process is for the Parks Department to recommend what they want to do there. And they have a functioning Vision Zero crossing now, and they'll decide if there's something different that they want to do.
Yeah, I understood it was not customary to have a PDF in the CIP with 0 funding in the 6 years.
Right. I mean, that's the key issue. I mean, if we do that, then we could put a lot of things in the project, in the budget that have no money, but seem to imply
Be very
a
big,
strong commitment,
very-
nevertheless.
A lot of paper. We need a lot of paper for things that haven't been
Yes.
funded but have been promised.
Yes. All right. Yeah, right. That could create some hard feelings. All right, moving on.
Okay.
So cost sharing, local parks and non-local parks, is this like when we are getting a state grant?
This is more of a opportunity to participate in some efficiency with a developer. If we have a developer operating nearby a park,
Gotcha.
and there's some way to leverage their work, but we can't get them 100% on the hook for an improvement, we will partner with them and share the costs.
All right. Elm Street Urban Park. This is already done?
This one's in design. Do you want to?
Design? Is this the farmers market, basically?
No, this is the northern part of Elm Street Park. This is the area that coincides with the CCT tunnel and
Gotcha.
surface route.
Yeah, on the
It
surface
was-
route, that's the key.
Yeah. So right now, we're working with DOT on what would happen under different scenarios of whether surface route's built versus the tunnel is built.
Right.
Well, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this was part of the scope of the Capitol Crescent Trail Tunnel, and that the part, as part of that project, we were going to get the Elm Street Park redone, and not, and so we didn't need any money here. Now the challenge is if we renege on the commitment that's been made to return the Capitol Crescent Trail Tunnel to the community, which has always been part of the Purple Line project, then we not only lose the tunnel and create a very dangerous crossing, we also lose a important urban park element that was going to be part of that project. Is that accurate?
My understanding of this particular PDF is that it predates the whole Capitol Crescent Tunnel issue. There had been a development on the hook to design improvements to the north end of Elm Street Park. They did that. There was actually an approved plan for that part of the park that, correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, that contemplated the surface route, but not necessarily a tunnel. And then that development did not occur, but this PDF refers to the old plan that, of course, now is under review because of the tunnel issue.
But I think
There was going to be.
But what you're saying is
Okay,
right.
sorry.
You're on the right track. The point here is that if the tunnel goes forward, the idea that has been discussed between park staff and DOT is that DOT would construct a really amazing playground to replace the existing playground, and the other park amenities are at the northern end of that park. That won't happen if the trail.
We have one of the most densely populated areas in the county, and we have a very underutilized park here
Yes.
that is really not used at all because it's pretty run down and is not providing a real public benefit. And so part of that project, which I was trying to get clarity on, which, was that in the redevelopment, in the Capitol Crescent Trail Tunnel project, that we were going to come back and have a top flight playground park that is usable and accessible, and that will not only be serving the densely populated area immediately located, but will have, a significant playground element with access to a trail. Exactly the thing that we were talking about before of having trails that are connected to public amenities that families can utilize for free. And that,
Yes,
okay,
that's right.
Thanks. Okay.
I did want to just say, though, for the record, the tunnel funding was never in the project. That's something we've talked about. I know that there was statements made that it would be added, but the money was never in there. And I don't think DOT thinks that the crossing that they've got above ground is unsafe. So, did you think the park was also going to be paid for out of the tunnel project?
The mitigation for the impact to the park from the tunnel coming up at the north end of the park, inside the park, was going to involve DOT constructing a playground. Because in order to build that tunnel, you have to wipe out the existing playground and everything else that's in the footprint of where the limits of disturbance of the tunnel project are going to happen.
Okay, so that may be, I would have to check with the DOT folks. I think they were looking at like a 50 million. It was a large number, and maybe those costs are in there, and I'm just not familiar with that.
Yes, they, in working with them, those numbers are included in there because there's massive utility relocations and
Got it.
staging
Yes.
within the park area. So we did require them to put it back, as you're describing, as a very nice amenity.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. And I don't want to get into an argument over this, but this was absolutely committed. We've already funded some of the engineering and design, and this has long been part of the Apex building project that the county was involved in. This has been part of the ongoing discussion of the Purple Line. Literally, we took away infrastructure from the community with the promise that we were going to return it better. And so, I respect where you're coming from, but I have to categorically disagree that this was not committed just because we hadn't put the funding in the CIP. That's on us, but this was absolutely committed to the community, and this would be taking it away, which is essentially what has been proposed. And I'm hopeful that as a council, we can work to fix that, because I think it's wrong.
All right. Well, we'll look at that in the context of the tunnel. All right, let's keep going. Yeah, absolutely. So facility planning, non-local parks, Hillendale. What's the timeline on Hillendale?
Andrew, do you know? Hillendale?
Hillendale, we're working through detailed design. There's park staff who are occupying the building who will be moved to the Wheaton headquarters.
Right.
And once they're moved in around the August timeframe, we'll be able to get ready for construction starting up this fall.
What's your confidence level on getting the staff moved in August?
It's pretty good. The building's coming along.
It's very high.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right, Greater Branch Trail Extension, North Branch Trail, that's getting finished up. Seneca Crossing, local park. Is that done already? Is that?
No,
No. This must be waiting for something that's contingent?
this is just it would be a new park in Germantown that has not yet had its funding come into the 6-year CIP.
Okay. I won't get into it, I guess, at the moment, but I don't quite, there must be a reason why it's in the budget if it doesn't, even though it has no funding?
I think, again, I didn't realize either until just now that this was brand new. Oh, I'm confused then. Why do we?
Here,
why
I'll
is it
explain.
here?
It's actually, this is again one of those that has been in our CIP for a while. We had work that has been proposed here, but again, every year we're always bumping out projects because we're having to address affordability issues. And this is one of those that unfortunately has been in a few cycles of the CIP, but we've been unsuccessful at getting funding. If we're going to be considering doing similar approaches to what we did with the Capitol Crescent Trail, this may be one that we want to remove out of the basis system for our PDFs until it's ready to move on.
Carl, would it move it to the section 5 then? So we have a list of the projects that are not recommended for funding. Are these completed projects, or would it fall in this grouping?
Yes, it would fall into that grouping.
Because these are ones, right, that have previously existed, so we would move it here. Unlike
Yes.
the Capitol Crescent Trail Little Falls,
So this
which
would-
has never been in the CIP, which
Right,
is.
so the Capitol Crescent
Thanks.
Trail has been recommended by this committee to be a closeout, even though it just barely started. This one would be a closeout,
I wouldn't say a
even though
closeout
it's-
because it's never been approved. I would say the
Right.
CCT just gets removed
Okay,
from the
yeah.
document. But this one, since it's been a project, would move to section 5.
Yes, but
Why don't you
funding
guys
for this
talk
one has only
amongst
been in the
yourselves?
PLC.
Yeah, thank you. Good dialogue. I followed that.
We will
Sure.
take care of that.
Are there any other projects? I know we're nearing the end here, but I just think in the future to know what got bumped out, what got pushed out, just like knowing that in advance and not discovering it through reading through the packet, that would be helpful. And it doesn't look like there are any others that are in that category from just glancing.
The only other one that would be somewhat be similar is Warner Circle, but that is because the funding has been, the funding has been in the Beyond 6 years, but we have been working towards trying to actively get a new tenant and a new use in the building. And so because that one has been, we've been actively working on it before we start introducing funding back for any kinds of renovation work or anything. That one, I would say we should keep, even though it's been at zero for a while, except for the Beyond 6 years.
Okay.
I think one thing on the Seneca Crossing, that is a project that's considered a local park, so it's funded with park and planning bonds. And I know that Parks has really tried to focus on their level of effort, so I think a couple years ago they started sometimes delaying those standalone projects in favor of the refreshes and those kinds of things, and this may well have been one that was delayed because of that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
All right, don't know that there's much to talk about with the rest of these, but natural surface, urban park elements, Warner Urkel we just heard about. So
Right.
now we'll move to some of the bigger ones.
So now, what I would suggest, because you've gone through project by project, everything in the CIP, I would suggest if you go to the staff report that was written for today, there is, starting on page 3, I have listed all of the sub-projects that were impacted by the affordability reconciliation PDF. And I think this, other than the now recommendations for the trails, this is where the committee would go through and make recommendations related to whether they're in agreement with Park's suggestion of removing some of the funding for these items to meet the targeted PDF.
Okay. Let's do that. So we'll start with Black Hill Regional Park, the seed classroom. We really
Right,
actually
and we had
talked-
discussed this one earlier at
that,
the
so-
last time because it was a
This is,
new
it's a-
project.
It's generally a good news story, which is you
Yes.
figured out how to proceed despite, the fiscal reallocation. You've got a great project that
Very little
you're going to
change.
be able to build there.
Yeah.
So,
It has $250,000 in state aid and $150,000 in contributions, so we're leveraging quite a bit of money.
okay, so that's good, thank you.
Okay.
All right, and then the next is, we've already talked about, this is the cricket field, and so we do not want to delay this, and staff's recommendation is don't delay this as well, or,
Staff deferred to the parks list on this
And
one. The
this was
parks
the-
came in with, because part of the reason is when the parks came up with this list of ways to fund the non-recommended reduction, they looked at it more than just, keep this project, not keep this one. There were also other funding sources that went into these
Right.
projects, and so they were able to take some of
Things
those
were
funding sources, move them
tied
around,
together.
support other projects. The cricket field is one of those. It was stayed in and is supported by another project that will be delayed because there was open space funding
Program
for
open
it
space,
that
correct.
got moved into this project. So it is a little more nuanced than simply some of these things were funded, some of them were cut, just because they had GO bond funding. The secondary funding sources also played a part in this.
got it?
Without
Yeah,
that
we
program.
already covered this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did.
Okay,
Yeah. Who could forget? All right. Get you some wicked hiking boots.
I have them. I resent the statement that I don't have any.
All right.
The next is the Brookside Garden Master Plan implementation. This did increase the funding or change in scope. It did delay it just from 1 year, from FY '22 into FY '23.
Okay. And that is for, what is that for?
It was
precisely?
the delay?
No, the actual
The
expenditure.
project.
Oh, it was that $250,000 that we'd intended in fiscal year '22 was to start design on the project.
I see. What is the project you'd be
So
designing?
there's 3 components. This is Brookside.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's 3 components to Brookside. There is a renovation of the rose garden. This is the various components of the garden that are aging. There's a ADA and renovation project and ADA improvements to what's called the formal gardens. And then there is planning money to do what is really the largest component contemplated by the Brookside Master Plan, which is the movement of the conservatory where the butterfly show is, up to where the visitor center is. So you develop a central hub up on the top of the hill next to the visitor center. It's to do the program of requirements and the plan and the cost estimate for that component.
All right. Okay, and so you're pushing that design from 23 to 24,
22 to 23.
22 to 23. Okay. All right. And is that one we got a memo about?
We did, I was just about to say that. You did receive a memo from Councilmember Navarro requesting that it not get delayed the 1 year. And
Okay.
you did receive testimony from people talking about how much they enjoy the facility at Brookside Gardens. as a county
All right.
amenity.
Well, we should try
I
to,
will say one thing, it looks like, if I'm reading this chart correctly, that it finishes up about the same time that it would have under Park and Planning's initial request.
The total project completion is not delayed, just the start of it. So
Is that
design is
realistic?
delayed 1 year, but the,
What impact would that?
is that realistic to be able to do the design work in 1 year rather than 2? It sounds like that's what the impact would be.
You just turned off, you turned off there.
Sorry, 2 phases of this are construction components, actual design and construction that were contemplated with, originally with design in FY '22 and then the construction in '23 and '24. Whether it's realistic to compress that, all of that work into 2 years, we'll do our best.
Okay. So again, before it was it 250 and 250, and now it's 500 in 1 year? Is that,
No, you'll see, you'll see on the third.
where is it, where
Sorry.
was the completion date?
If you look on the third page of the staff report, the completion date is in FY '24. That's the last year they show money. And you'll see that the money gets moved from FY '22 into '23. It does bump it up.
It gets moved from 22 to 23.
If you want another
So-
reference, you could look in the first packet from FED on February 24, on Circle 113. You'll see the original PDF as it was transmitted last November. There was $250,000 of GEO bonds in fiscal year '22. And then fiscal year '23, that was $700,000. And then in fiscal year '24. So this simply is taking that $250,000 in fiscal year '22 and adding it to the $700,000 in fiscal year '23.
Well, I
Oh,
mean,
actually, it was also added, it was split between those 2 following fiscal years.
well, it seems like we ought to go back to the previous, more realistic plan. I mean, if we can. It doesn't sound like we're talking about money overall. It's the same amount of money. It's the years. And so if we can get started earlier, that will help us ensure we finish on our date. So, you know, I think we would add this to our list of revisions.
Okay.
And we're going to have to do some more work on how those all fit together, but, okay.
Yep.
Oh, there you go, Andrew.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out from Parks if, about the timeline. It sounds like there wasn't a lot of consultation on the impact in terms of delivery date, which I think still needs to be figured out, but I tend to agree. I mean, Brookside Gardens is the crown jewel of the Parks system. I think all of us recognize that, and if we can make this work, then that would be great, and I do think we should add it to the list and then figure out what we can afford. But I think it would be helpful when we do come back or in the interim to find out what the actual impact of this is, because the recommendation from the executive seems to indicate that there's no impact of the delay, that it would still be delivered, the same fiscal year. And that begs the question of whether or not that's true and realistic, and whether, you can put anything on paper you want. And so I think it'd be helpful for all of us to know, if this will truly have very little or no impact, then fine, let's move forward. But if it will, then let's know what the impact is and figure out what we can afford and whether or not we can make a change.
And that's why I'd agree to put it on the list as originally requested, but with that information coming for when it comes back and we have to make decisions on reconciliation, I think that's an important piece of information.
Yeah, I mean, my hunch is that we don't know whether it's actually easier to do it in the 2 years or the 1. I mean, I think for the executive's reconciliation, maybe it was easier to do it in 1 year rather than 2. We don't really know how ours reconciliation would go.
Well, and I would just say that we just gave a plug number, and these were the non-recommended cuts
Exactly.
from Parks, so this is their
Oh,
numbers.
that's right. This was theirs to
Their
meet
numbers.
the affordability CIP item. Okay. Thank you. Good clarification. All right, so we'll continue. We've got some time. We can keep working on that.
We'll get you that information. The next one on the top of page 4 is the legacy open space. The savings here is that there's been a delay of 1.6 million combined for FY '21 and '22 that moves beyond the 6th year of the CIP. So it's basically a reduction in FY '21 and '22.
Okay. All right.
Okay. The one below that is Little Bennett Regional Park Day Use Area. This currently has funding through FY '24 in the CIP, but the recommendation here is to delay this project beyond the 6 years of the CIP. This not only frees up GEO bond funding, it also frees up the program open space funding that has then been distributed to other projects to support any cuts in bond funding.
All right, so again, from a vision perspective, this is creating something like Black Hills Regional Park, which is, has a nice array of amenities on a pretty sizable compound, and this is creating something like that at Little Bennett, which would be, well used, just as Black Hills is well used. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And, I'm going to surprise some folks here in that I think that in my conversations with parks, I think that this actually makes sense. There needs to be kind of a retooling of what this project may be. We've delayed it quite a bit, and the needs in the community have changed. Myself, who lives in Darnestown and continues to use Black Hills, but in Germantown using Black Hills, and folks who are in Clarksburg who use Black Hills, and I just talked about how great of a resource it is incredible. And so from that perspective, maybe a rethinking about what this may entail makes sense. However, there is one little caveat, and that caveat is that we have continued to, and I know we'll be talking about this in another 2 steps, about Ovid Hazen Wells, but that certainly is one in which I do feel as though if we are going to delay this beyond the 6-year CIP, it is imperative for us to continue to deliver Ovid Hazen Wells in its true fidelity, which means not only the park itself, but also the carousel. It truly then becomes the complete project. It allows for us to move this other one that may change in terms of what the requirements may be and the vision may be for Little Bennett Regional Park, but it certainly is one that I think some of that revenue being shifted to Ovid Hazen Wells because, when we're looking at 25,000 residents that are now in Clarksburg and continues to expand each and every day, we're finally building a library, finally building a fire station. Things are starting to complete there, and so for us to complete that park project makes sense and not to leave it kind of half done.
So it's, thank you for your comments. I really appreciate your leadership, helping us see a perspective here, which I'm sort of hearing as, the Little Bennett Day Use is a regional park. It's just as Black Hills is. It's I go there for events. We all go there for events. Clarksburg really wants a large, not a local park, but essentially, yes, a large park for Clarksburg. Yes. That's what Clarksburg really wants. And so, we need to recognize that if, we have a large regional park in the region. We could always use more large regional parks, but if we're thinking about Clarksburg and how to fulfill the promises there, thinking more about a large local park, might meet that need more directly than a regional park. Obviously, everyone would like both, and we will. Okay, that's helpful. Appreciate that. Okay, so we will accept the, we won't push back on this, and I think the concept of retooling that vision there would be helpful in the meantime. Thank you. All right.
Okay, moving forward, the next one on the list is the Northwest Branch Recreational Park Athletic Area. This had funding in the budget that was sent over by MNC PPC in November, requesting funding in FY '26 to start construction of Phase 2, and their non-recommended cut would be to move that one more year out or into the 6th year of the beyond the 6th year of the CIP.
Okay.
You
now-
did, I think this was also included in Councilmember Navarro's memo to the committee to consider not making this recommended reduction.
So this is, again, this is like an athletic, what is it?
You can see detailed information on Circle 143 of the staff report for last time. Phase 2 is really about including a picnic shelter, playgrounds, maintenance building, additional parking and lighting, fencing trails. SHA has already constructed what is known as Phase 1, which is the athletic fields at this location. But,
Okay.
Director Riley can.
So this is, additional amenities to create a broad, diverse
Yeah,
park
this,
experience.
this project we got completely through mitigation from the ICC project. We got the land and we got the state to build several athletic fields that are open and being utilized, but they only provided the bare bones infrastructure to use those fields, parking lots and access paths. This funding would turn it into a true park. You'd have your other amenities that people could enjoy while they're there, including playground, picnic shelter, and then other improvements to these fields. As you know, we're trying to make all of our fields in regional recreational parks high-end fields, so we would add the irrigation and the lighting and those types of things.
Okay. All right, well, I think we should try to, again, try to put this back if we can, the 620, so we'll put that into our bucket, and we'll resolve how everything is sort of ranked at some point. Okay, let's keep going.
You'll turn the page. We'll be on page 5 now. Today's staff report. This is the Ovid Hazen Wells Recreational Park Athletic Area. You've already started that conversation, which I think there's been a recommendation to move the $3 million that had been pushed beyond the 6th year of the CIP as part of the reconciliation PDF target.
So, start from the beginning again.
This one I find difficult to follow, but I'm new to the
Right.
process. It was requested for funding in the last CIP, fully phase 1 of this project, which included the carousel. During the deliberations of the last CIP, the carousel portion, $3 million of it got pushed beyond the 6th year of
So
that,
the last
of the last
CIP, the
CIP.
recommendation was to proceed with all of the other elements of the park,
All the other elements of phase 1 except for the carousel.
except for the carousel.
When the Parks
And that
Department.
is that, and how much was in the budget for that?
I think it was 5 million, 5.4 or 5.3 million.
In the current CIP that is approved right now, well, it was amended because we got a bond bill that increased it a little bit. So there currently is $5.3 million of funding identified within the 19 to 24 CIP. And then there also is this $3 million in the beyond 6 years. Our approach was in this CIP to reunite that funding all together again, because that funding all united, the $8.3 million, is necessary to provide as many of the amenities as possible that can support the carousel moving into the park.
However, under the reconciliation
yes.
PDF, that 3 million was moved back out again. And program and bond money was saved here, but it was replaced with program open space money that came from the Little Bennett Park delay. So there's a lot of moving pieces with Ovid Hazen Wells, but I think the piece before the committee is whether they want to delay the 3 million beyond the 6 years so that this could be, phase 1 could be completed as fully funded.
Okay. And tell us about the timing with the Wheaton and the relationship with the Wheaton Carousel. So if we were able to put the funding back, how do those two things relate?
The Wheaton Carousel is not a problem. We can replace the carousel totally separate from this question.
Okay, good.
Can I just ask? I thought one of the questions in a prior conversation was, everybody knows the Wheaton Carousel is supposed to move to Ovid Hazen Wells, but was there any sense that there was a backfill carousel then coming back to Wheaton?
Yeah, and we can accommodate that irrespective of what you decide.
You've got other sources where you can, to acquire.
The funding to purchase a new carousel for Wheaton would be in our enterprise fund.
Gotcha.
So it's fine. It's basically, we finance it ourselves.
Right.
Yes.
you borrow money
And pay for it
and
with
pay for it with the revenue.
from the ticket sales.
Yes. Right. Okay, so Ovid Hazen Wells is a long called for park that serves the Clarksburg community. It has a lot of elements to it that are very exciting. Tell us about some of the elements of this park.
Well, it includes a skate spot, I believe a picnic area, an athletic field. All those things we believe are necessary to make the park, put the park in a position that it can accept the carousel. Because just as very few people are going to go to Wheaton just for the carousel, that might be the primary draw, but once you've ridden the carousel a few times, even if you're 6 years old, eventually you decide, I'd like to.
Especially when you're 6 years
Maybe
old.
especially short, your attention span may vary depending on your age and inclination.
The
But-
big, large climbing mound gets a lot of attention.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Whatever. I know I'm probably calling it the
I
wrong
enjoy
thing.
that myself.
Yeah,
I don't know
exactly.
about anybody else.
Is that
But
the former name, the big, large cloud? Yes, yes.
so the point is, if you don't have a collection of amenities, the carousel really can't stand alone. So the idea here has always been make sure there's a critical mass of different things to do, different people, different ages, so people can go out there and spend half a day or whatnot. So that's why the carousel is kind of at the back end, even though we all understand that's of critical importance and is why everybody's particularly interested in seeing this happen.
All right, well, I think we ought to re-accelerate this funding if we can. This is something that will just, I think, be a really strong statement for Clarksburg that the county is committed to meeting the needs in the community. And to the point about the population growth, there are a lot more people now than there were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I think one of the concerns in the past was, there ought to be enough people to use the carousel, so that you're not deploying a carousel, which frankly won't have, enough riders to kind of warrant it. But it feels like Clarksburg is certainly at a critical mass now, and if there's any way for us to do this. Now, for us to put this funding back, as with all the funding that we would want to change, we'll have to figure out how all those pieces in the capital budget fit together. And so there would be other priorities that are going to get moved around, but we don't know what that will be. I mean, there's so many variables in play right now with the capital budget, and we've got several months to see how everything fits together. But I know I for one, would really appreciate the ability to fulfill this promise and bring it home. So I'm going to go to the district council member next for his comments.
Well, I just really want to say thank you, and I don't want to talk myself out of a yes, but I just wanted to certainly make sure that folks understand about why this is truly important. I mean, this was 295 acres that was actually deeded to Parks with the stipulation that Parks would turn this into a commitment for the Clarksburg community and the carousel. So this is private donation of land, incredibly valuable land, that was given to us with stewardship of doing the right thing. And so from that perspective, while I agree with you, Mr. Chair, that certainly we were waiting to see whether or not, the rooftops would be there to ensure support of something like this. It's very clear that at this point we were already there and we continue to exceed those numbers. I mean, you and I both know, as well as everybody here on this dais and pretty much probably everybody here in the audience as well, that folks will go back and forth and visit this even though they don't live in Clarksburg. And so the greater Germantown area that is well over 100,000 residents now will utilize this space as well. And so you're talking not only Clarksburg, but the greater Up-County region as a whole. And the Wells Carousel itself that now sits at Wheaton was built by the Wells family.
Oh, really?
Built by the Wells family. And so from that perspective, it really is something where, again, this is a commitment, right? Where we made a promise to a family who said they were going to do the right thing by us, and I just feel as though it's time for us to do the right thing by them. So I really appreciate your support. I appreciate the committee's support, and I'll shut up before I talk myself into a no.
All right. Andrew.
Thank you for that. Thank you, the district council member, for your advocacy on this. I appreciate everything that you said, particularly the fact that this was land that was provided to us for the public use, and taking advantage of that is something that we ought to fulfill as best we can. And I think that's a really important point to be made, and I am also supportive as long as we can figure out how to do it, which, it's getting more and more difficult the longer we tend to meet here in terms of fitting everything underneath our affordability caps and the constraints that we have. But certainly am appreciative and supportive. I just had a technical question. It's $3 million, but what does that mean? We have to find $3 million, but do we have particular years? I know we pushed the $3 million off the PDF, but
Right.
when we go to reconciliation, I think it is
We have a
important that we.
schedule for it,
Yeah.
Councilmember Friedson. And what I did, because the original ask from MNC PPC was to keep the 3 million in there, that's what I went back to. They had a funding schedule that had a fully funded phase 1. So it's really just returning to that same timeframe. And they can comment if that's any different, but really that's the way I looked at it. So we can,
Got it.
we'll have that typed up, but it'll.
Okay, yeah, just be helpful. It's because of all the different funding sources here and the creativity with using program open space money and others. It's unlike other PDFs. This is one that's pretty difficult to follow in terms of where we'd be putting the money in, and so it'd just be helpful outside of this meeting just to get clarity of $3 million in GO bonds as part of this 6-year CIP. Where does that money need to go in terms of us finding the money during reconciliation? Because ultimately, it's not just the total 6-year amount. The more important aspect really is which year the money needs to come from in order to make this all fit into the beautiful puzzle we are working very hard to figure out how to make work. So thanks for that.
I just wanted to add that bringing it back onto schedule this originally was funded fully with GO bonds, and as was mentioned with the delay of Little Bennett Day Use Area, that delayed not only GO bonds but some program open space, which was reassigned. So the one change that would be, even if we did restore this back to the original schedule, one caveat is that we would have those two funding sources still. That's why we didn't have to propose delaying it further to respond to the county executive's requested reductions. So
It may end up being that if we can add the carousel in 25 or 25 and 26, that will preserve what Parks has put together in terms of the puzzle, the jigsaw puzzle with program open space.
We'll have to look at it more carefully then. Right.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, just appreciate Councilman Rice being here and agree with the advocacy. We've seen the growth with the outlets. I think this is going to get even further use even outside of Up County. I think people will come to it on the ICC and go for other reasons. So I think this is an important commitment and really could be a great big anchor, and we should try to get it done as soon as we can. So appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's regional. It's inside Clarksburg, It really is, right? I tend to think it will be more local, but I don't know. Maybe not. What do you think, Mike? Is this something that?
Well, by our standards, it's classified as a recreational park, which is a high level of active use, which will be a draw. There are already ball fields there that have a pretty wide service area. As you know, people travel a long way to play ball.
They do.
I think this will be more of a regional destination.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you.
Good answer.
Score 1 for Jawando. All right.
Not that we keep score.
Not that we keep score.
Are we on the next one below Ovid Hazen Wells?
What's that?
Are we moving on to the next
Yes.
conversation? Okay. The Pilar non-local, the minor renovations, that was something we had discussed even just today. That is really fulfilling the need to reduce current revenue in addition to GO bonds, and it's just bringing it back to current funding level.
Right.
And you do
Pilar.
have park refresher and other things, so I deferred to the Parks Department that they could withstand that same current funding. And if you turn the page, you have the restoration of historic structures. This is the second PDF that was going to have a modification, and it has to do with meeting that current revenue target. Again, it just restores it to current funding levels.
I see. So the affordability would not allow us to increase the
Correct.
funding.
And then the next one, if,
Yeah.
okay, sorry.
Just on the historic structures, does that have any impact on current historic properties and projects that are being undertaken, or would this just limit the additional projects that the department would be able to undertake? And there's just a number of very important historic projects that are currently underway. I just want to make sure that this wouldn't cause any disruption.
It's the latter,
Okay, so this would be new projects.
yeah.
Okay, I'm a huge believer in these projects. I think that what the Parks Department does for historic properties and the educational value and cultural value that they provide are massive. Obviously, there's a lot of other competing priorities, so I'm glad that we're not going to have an impact on the current projects, but I am hopeful that we can figure out ways to make sure that we, emphasize this moving forward, because, Josiah Henson as one that's coming online, even the Seneca store. I mean, there's just a number of amazing projects that the department has been doing, and I hope that we can continue to build off of that.
Yeah, I'd love to see that Blair House getting used. So is that within this budget, or,
The Blair House, the real thing we're trying to solve with the Blair House is a tenant, and then whether that tenant can bring any resources or whether we have to do it and what the price tag is.
yeah,
But there still is a significant chunk of money to be invested by someone if that house is to be used.
yeah. And
And we're always on the search for partners.
college didn't bite?
The college did bite originally. The college was very, I felt the college was committed if you go back 3 or 4 years.
I remember, yeah.
And then there was some change in thinking, and eventually I had to hunt them down for a final answer, and the answer was, we just can't do anything at this time. So I think we will go back and re-engage them again and see if there's any renewed interest.
Worth trying. All right.
And then the last one, really to consider for the reconciliation PDF, was the Wheaton Regional Park modification. Again, this received program open space funding, and so it actually allowed for slight acceleration of effort, so there's no downside to this one. And then the
Okay.
last one we've already talked about removing. So at this point, where I see the committee is, you've given us a list of things you'd like to see if the budget will tolerate restoring them.
But we're
You
short
might wanna-
one item for that.
I was going to say, or any
Yeah.
new items you want to add. So you've got the list of everything we've covered, if there's any new items, and then how you want to prioritize it.
Okay. Great. Well, I wanted to talk about Blair. I have shared a memo with my colleagues. I don't know if Cliff Driver is here. I saw him earlier. There he is. If Cliff, you could come up, or if Mike, I'd like to preface the conversation just by talking about access to field issues and, what kind of challenge we have, particularly in this type of the county. Hi, John. Welcome back. And also what you think this potentially could provide to have 2 additional rectangular fields next to a synthetic field as well. Really have appreciated your work on this. I know this was, you had to turn around a lot of information here quickly. And generally speaking, I'm so enthusiastic about your work and the work with our athletic fields program. It's really been such a highlight of my time at the council, and I'm really appreciative of this county having you here and your team. So let's talk about the Blair Fields. Tell us what you know. You've talked to MCPS. Start from the beginning. Maybe just help explain what the arrangement is today and what it could be according to this model.
Sure. So Cliff Driver, Montgomery Parks. Blair is a unique facility in its location, kind of at the 29, 495, 95 merge, if you will. That We are struggling with inventory down county, especially on our east side. We maintain 3 fields on this site, considered Blair Local Park. There's a baseball field that is irrigated and lit. There's a softball field that's irrigated and lit, and there's a synthetic surface that's on the site. As we continue to talk about how we expand our inventory on the lower east side, Blair immediately became a focus of conversation. We've made some significant investments to this area with North Four Corners Local Park, which is just right down the road at University, as well as Pinecrest Local Park, which is almost directly across the street from where Blair High School is. Both of those are smaller fields, though. We're struggling with full-size adult fields. It's a unique opportunity because of the fact that we already own the land, right? The county already has this property. We're not asking for land acquisition funding. We are looking to do this in 2 separate phases to try to limit the impact to the school activities. We try to do this during 2 separate summers as a phase 1 and phase 2. We would do some soil modifications, some grading, some drainage. We would also update the irrigation systems on both fields and then light both fields. So the lighting is of particular importance to us because of the fact that all 3 fields that are currently on site that maintained by Montgomery Parks are lit. And it expands the playability aspect or availability aspect of what these fields could have, right? So Blair is also one of the largest schools in the state of Maryland, if not the largest. Last time I heard it was the largest. Somebody may have overtaken it by now. But this is needed not only...
It keeps growing, actually.
This is not only for our communities, but also for our schools, right? So the same, what we talk about all the time is the same kids that are using our MCPS facilities are the same youth that are using our community facilities, right? They're just programmed a little differently.
What is there now? Tell us a little bit more about what's in each of these spaces.
Sure. So the field that sits closest to 29 is a track field. It would be your standard high school track field if we were developing it today. It just lacks the fact of having stadium seating around it. But it does have a track. It has long jump, triple jump pits, as well as a full-size rectangle inside of it. The other field is more of a multi-purpose field. Right now, there's a 60-foot softball field that sits in the corner closest to the school. There is what we'd like to call a multi-use field that sits beyond that. We have a lot of facilities that are diamond and rectangle, and then they're used together. The proposed upgrades would increase the quality of surface for both fields, as well as provide some increased utilization for the surface in the practice area. One of the biggest things that recently we've just been having conversations is that typically we're not finding 3 full-size rectangles in the same location.
Right.
And this could provide itself an opportunity to have tournaments in our Lower East Side, which is a huge economic development for us.
I can't tell you how many parents I tell who have told me about the need. They always have to travel for tournaments. Right. They spend, if it's not Soccerplex, then it's somewhere much further, frankly. This would have 3 fields in one location and a lot of parking already. So you think it could be potentially applicable for tournaments?
100%. Really? Yeah. Really easy to access from both personal vehicles as well as for metro access. Our public transportation has a hub right there in the North Four Corners area. And when we're talking about accessibility to fields, sometimes it's challenging because we're trying to figure out where routes are. This already has a pre-established route in that North Four Corners area to provide public transportation.
Yep. So what does that mean, a tournament field? What does that mean exactly?
Well, it gives it the opportunity to have 3 fields side by side, right? Which is, if you look at our large regional recreational parks, Cabin John, Wheaton, whatnot, those have the ability to hold tournaments, but both of those are designed around diamond sports. This could be designed around rectangular sports, which is we do not currently have the inventory to facilitate that in the down county area outside of our gym of the Maryland Soccerplex. It gives the ability to where you can program all three and there's teams switch between them. And you don't have to get into a vehicle or take transportation to be able to go to an additional site.
So you have these weekend events where teams are playing multiple games over the course of a weekend in a tournament?
Yep.
Andrew probably knows more about this than I do as the all-county lacrosse player, and then you have lighting, which means you can run. What makes this really unique from a lighting perspective is you're on the Beltway. You could hardly ask for a better location as far as minimizing impact of additional lighting and frankly heavy use. It's an ideal location to maximize use, and yet it has been somewhat overlooked over the years. It's kind of just unmaintained field at the moment, right?
Right.
So you could have a tournament spot, so families would come in from around the Mid-Atlantic and stay in hotels in Silver Spring, and if they're not from the area, or your local athletic leagues would do their playoffs there or something like that. All right. Well, I'm really excited about it, Andrew.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The reason why I did the field sports and mostly contact sports was because the only thing worse than my jump shot was my vertical. So, that's why we keep Councilmember Juando around to help us in that department with a much higher vertical, much better jump shot than I ever had. But I think this is a really interesting proposal. Thank you to Councilmember Reamer for putting it forward, for your work on it. I think all the things that you've said make a lot of sense to me. The proximity of the Beltway, and access to a lot of different people from all over the county, the three rectangular sports. I totally get that. I mean, I think about all the baseball tournaments that I played at Cabin John and Wheaton, and the lack of similar facilities that we have for the rectangular sports, and so I totally can appreciate that as well. And having the parking facilities, I think, is significant. I mean, that takes a huge cost away. Just curious. What would the timeline be if we were to find the money to fund it after all the conversation we've had about how hard it's going to be to find all of these things? But if we were able to include this in this CIP, I mean, there's no acquisition here, there's no parking facilities. What's the timeline of once you get access to the funds? How long would it take to put this in place, and then how quickly would people actually be starting to use the facilities?
So I believe that we can start maintaining them immediately, in which we could open those up to community use. I think that our proposed timeline would probably be our first phase in FY22, and our second phase being FY23. But we can go ahead and open these up to community use right now. Obviously, school use will have priority over top of community use as being a high school. But from that Saturday on, like Saturday around noon, that's typically when high school sports, they're practicing, kind of tapers off, and then weeknights as well. And then we would start with phase one being the track field that sits out next to where 29 is in FY22, and then phase two, the multi-purpose field, being FY23.
And so the funding for this phase one funding and phase two funding, we would want it in FY22 and 23. Ideally, that would be what is being proposed. Is that accurate? Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, thanks.
Will?
Thank you. And good to see you, Cliff. Thanks for all your great work. I agree 100%. You're doing a great job. My question was on, kind of tied into the school use. Is there already something in the works to do some work to these fields, or is there anything happening currently in the school? There's no plans, or there haven't been any proposals to renovate or do anything with the current fields?
John Nissel, for the record, Deputy Director for Operations. Currently, those fields are not maintained by us. They're maintained by MCPS, whoever their contractor is, or perhaps they do it in-house. So they basically mow those fields, and that's about it.
Okay.
No nutrient management, aeration, overseeding, none of that stuff is done currently.
And as far as we talked about how it's the largest high school in the state, right, on any given day and growing, plans to add additional space to the school, would this impact? I vaguely remember hearing something, I could be wrong, but are you aware of any of those types of plans, just thinking about the capacity of the school itself, and this would not take this wouldn't have taken additional land. It would just use what's already there, correct? And you're not aware of any conversations concurrently about adding potential physical structure to make the school have additional space or capacity?
So when we met with the MCPS, the principal and athletic director, they did not allude to any expansion of the school coming onto these pieces of athletic fields.
Okay, great. That would, yeah, go ahead.
Important to double check that, but.
Yes, we will. And if I could add to, the baseball, softball skinned-in field would also enhance, one of the issues that we have is when the schools need to practice and the fields in the local part are too wet. This gives them an opportunity to practice when sometimes they couldn't practice, so it just gives them more availability. I also think it really upgrades the player experience for the high school kids as well, if we can renovate these two fields also.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think confirming that second question is important, but assuming that everyone's on board and the school likes it, I think, again, we have to find the money for all these great things, but I have no doubt that you do a great job maintaining it, and it would get a lot of use considering the location. And I know you already have our minor league team playing there, and so I'm sure everyone would appreciate the upgraded facilities nearby here. So thank you for the proposal, and I'm fine putting it on the list, realizing we have to look at everything else.
Awesome.
If I may, I just want to you've given Cliff nice plugs. I agree with you. He's done a great job. As you may know, we've had some challenges with the fields at Blair at the past, but this weekend I was so pleased to see Blair Athletics tweet, Blazers softball and baseball starting strong. Thank you, Montgomery Parks, for amazing work on the fields.
So, all right.
I needed you to hear that. That is high praise.
That's terrific. Hey,
thank you.
One of the things I love about this is that, thousands of kids would get to spend more time on the Blair campus before they are enrolled in high school. And I think anything you can do to get kids comfortable with their future school is really beneficial. And to have this potentially be a primary resource athletic facility for, obviously it's regional, but including the Silver Spring, Tacoma area is going to help a lot of kids feel like they're really part of a connected experience, and Blair is just as much part of their life as the elementary school that they may go to. So certainly, if we were building Blair from scratch now, this is what we would have done. We'll be building Crown High School or Henson / formerly known as Woodward High School. I'm really excited. The district council member thinks that is a brilliant idea, by the way. Directing that to Mike as the Parks Archaeological. But we would ensure that there are multiple fields that are available for the students and for ideally community use. So, okay. So we have a plan, and it starts with the track field, phase 1, and then it does the multi-use field, phase 2, and we will put that in our additions and adjustments. Great. Now,
If there's any other new projects, this is where we would discuss them. If not, I basically have a list of 5 items. I don't know if the
Can I make up one right now?
subcommittee, of course.
you can try. It's usually the best, make it up the day before.
My point exactly. Thank you very much.
There's unlimited money until we have to do reconciliation, and then there's
That's right.
basically no money at all.
Yes. The list is, the number 1 is the trails in Vision Zero. I've lumped them together. They are the 3 PDFs that you made minor modifications to. That was the first change. The second would be recognizing your council members' memo and restoring the timing for Brookside Gardens, just that 1-year shift. The third item I have is the Northwest Branch, also restoring that 6th year, again, from the memo from your council member. The fourth is Ovid Hazen Wells. It would be restoring the $3 million there into the 6-year CIP. And number 5 is now the Blair high school fields. in FY '22 and '23. So I don't know if you want to order them at all, or if I've characterized everything, but those are the elements that I've heard today that we will be summarizing for council.
All right. Well, I'll make a stab at it, but you know, this is a conversation that I think will be ongoing. I'm not sure if we have to make this recommendation now about prioritization, because as a practical matter, we have another month or two before reconciliation begins in earnest, I think.
Actually, that's right. You will be coming back for operating budget and be able, although I think this will go to full council as a CIP before the committee will meet on operating budget, so.
It'll go to full council, right, and
Right.
full council will, so,
If I could suggest maybe
Yeah.
we could work with you, and especially, you know, Carl has, I think, some work to do at trying to figure out how this all fits
Okay.
together in terms of funding sources and that sort of thing. So maybe we
Okay.
could talk to you offline
that'd
about
be
it.
fine. I don't know that we have to structure that today, so we can, yeah.
Would we have another opportunity? I mean, I think that makes sense, but before it goes to full council to give guidance on the prioritization, no, right?
Only I think we don't have, I believe, another
have
FED
another
committee
meeting.
meeting before the council meeting on this.
When is that? Is that next week?
March 10th?
Yeah, next week.
10, okay, so soon, next week.
I guess we could send a letter. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, I know it's not.
All right,
I just feel
Okay,
like some
so
guidance.
here's one approach. I think this is probably, first tier is the trails, the really small items, and Vision Zero. I was including Vision Zero in the trails. Second tier is Overhazen Wells and Blair. That's kind of the pig and the python. And then the third tier is anything else. Which is, anything else would
Well, you
be
got
Brookside and
northwest and
Northwest.
So I don't know. I would maybe want to slightly adjust that, but
What's your
you're trying to have 3 tiers.
I thought, yeah,
as opposed to 2.
We could try to do two. I mean, my thought was the first tier we ought to be able to get in without much difficulty because there's fairly modest expenditures across the 6
Right,
years.
right.
The second tier is a big push.
Well, if we add them all up, I can't remember how much it was, but with the trails, it was obviously I dissented on one, so putting that in the first, that's that aside. I think that's a little over $1 million.
It is. If you count all three of them, it's about 1.5 million.
Okay.
All 3 trail items.
If you have just the first two, which was the renovation and the Vision Zero, that's 750,000.
So can we just go with those 2 as tier 1 since we all agreed on those?
Which, no, definitely I want the natural surface.
Okay.
I actually want that more than the hard surface, to be quite honest, because you can get like 10 miles of natural surface for like $100,000. You can get like
Right.
you can get like 100 yards of hard surface for that.
Well, yeah, but ADA and other people. I mean, I think there are other considerations with the hard surface. Different types of groups of people can use them.
Sure, and we have
So.
absolutely. You have to do
I
everything.
should mention, we're looking at a sensory trail for people with particularly visually impaired people could use the trail, and it would not necessarily have to be hard surface. Our trails planner just went up to, I think, Pennsylvania just a couple weeks ago and looked at an example where you basically have like a rope line around the perimeter of the trail, and there's various things you can touch. So you actually and that's a gravel path, it's a natural surface. So we're actually very interested in addressing some of the needs of people with disabilities, even within the natural surface.
And I would add that renovating the natural surface trails and expanding them, in the way that you do them now, makes them much more accessible. Like a lot of the existing natural surface trails, they get washed out. You have to like jump from rock to rock for a stretch of 10 feet.
Right.
And that makes it hard if let's look at gradations of mobility impairment. Like if you are just not the most athletic.
Yeah, it might not work for people in wheelchair,
yeah.
but it's true that older people or people
Exactly.
that are
I think
less
that's sort of the
athletic,
thing
yeah.
is having trails that toddlers and seniors can just as easily
Right.
use. And for that, I think you have to really invest in the natural surface trail item, because a lot of the older trails, are just not as good. They're not as ideal. So, it's a distinction between 10 Mile Creek Trail, which is brand new and it's wide and it's smooth and it's got undulations and it's pleasant,
Undulations.
versus, like other ones are just less so.
Well, I would just say we can decide how to do it. It's all going to come down to the money. All of these were increases above whatever the increases already were. I think we got to keep that in context too. So it's not like we either hate trails or over for trails, but I just think both of the East County, Brookside and Northwest. I know Blair's, inside the Beltway, it's right on the line there, but that's a new project. Just maintaining the crown jewel and moving those up. I'm not that comfortable putting both of those in a third tier. So I'd either want to do 2 tiers and lump it together with the other projects, or move Brookside up maybe. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge here, different than the operating budget, is in the operating budget, a reconciliation list is very clear, right? It's a direct competition, dollar for dollar, $1 in, $1 out. Here, that's not the case. Every project has to fit in like a puzzle, and so I do agree that we should put both the trail projects and the Vision Zero project into Tier 1. I will agree with that, but I also agree. So I'm gonna play like both sides here. So I agree with the chair on that. I'd like that to be Tier 1, but I also agree with Councilmember Jawanda that putting the rest of the projects in Tier 2, because ultimately the question is going to be, to me, how they fit, and I'm not totally clear how they're competing with one another or not.
Well, ultimately, we will have to reduce the affordability CIP, first of all, to make this recommendation. So, first of all, the county executive had like a $15 million placeholder, something like that. So we would be recommending like a $9 million placeholder. Is that?
Well, it'll be less than that now because we're adding the trails, which is about 1.5. Maybe a 7, maybe about half, probably about half that.
And, we don't know the feasibility of getting all that funding back in. We certainly know that our community came out in full force pressing us for more funding for parks. And so as for what would happen within, let's say we got 5 million of that, to your question, what actually is going to get funded? I think we'll need to have, I guess there's 2 ways we could do it. We could kick it back to planning and say, you guys, give some more thought to it, or we could be more specific in what we reconcile.
Yeah, I want to be realistic. I'm not sure we could come up with a way to make it all fit, but I think there are different moving parts that maybe at the margin we can figure out a way to close at least a little bit of this gap, which is why I said we'd like to have time to have Carl, who is excellent at his job, to help maybe figure out what the different possibilities are.
And if there's any way to make any of these projects more affordable, that would be helpful. When does this go to full council? As of now, it probably goes next week.
Yes.
But isn't that just to clarify, that's just a straw vote?
Yeah.
They would be like
Have your
rejecting us
list.
putting this on the reconciliation list.
Well-
We wouldn't be making a final decision
No.
Right.
of how it fits,
Oh,
right?
absolutely, correct.
Right.
And we've got time, and we could do it the following week. That's fine. So
I mean, you could provide them with this list of information of the things that you'd consider funding. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
prioritized.
I
You
think
can
we
give
have
as
to,
much
yeah.
information as possible about them. We'll work with Carl, but it doesn't have to be prioritized. And that conversation can happen later.
I think oftentimes council defers to the committee unless they have, I don't think they usually cut things from what the committee recommends at this point in the process.
right.
That was what I was
I
trying.
believe, though, that it's very likely that you guys will want to try to have a mini reconciliation prior to May. That has been done in the past, and then it's more important that I think your staff who's working on putting that together knows your priorities.
Right.
And council would express their priorities, I guess, in next week's session. But that, my guess is probably in April, there'll be some kind of mini reconciliation exercise to try and get some of this sort of tamped down across the board, not just in
When
this
did you
committee.
say that you thought that would be?
Historically, it's been in April when you have done
Right.
that.
And you may have time at the end of one of your committee operating budget work sessions to revisit this. So,
All right, so why don't we not put it on next Tuesday? We'll get a little bit of time for Parks to, Casey to talk about it a little further, and then we'll either have a quick check-in before we send it on, or we'll have some additional, we'll modify the committee recommendation as we send it on.
so no
Well,
information related to these 5 items for the council next week?
Well, I mean, I think we had 2 people agreeing on something, but I'm fine if we could modify it. If the proposal is not to say anything on prioritization right now.
Right.
Is that what you said? Am I reading that right?
Well, what I was saying was just hold off on putting it on the full council agenda. It doesn't have to
Oh, you're
go
saying
on
not even
next
put it on the
week.
agenda.
Well, so what I will bring to the council next week, though, is a summary of what this committee has talked about and is making recommendation on. And so if the committee wants to recommend making these changes, just not prioritizing them, that is part of the discussion today.
Yeah.
Are they informed of that next week? I would say you should. Would say you would provide them with this list, as it does modify some of the things that are already in the staff report. They're going to be briefed on your deliberations on this staff report. But I don't think you need to make a recommendation related to prioritization.
Okay.
All right, well, we will eventually.
Yes. Just not next week.
And I'm just trying to understand, what is the reason why we're going to push off from the 10th to the 17th? I mean, if we're not
Well, it sounds
You're
like we're
not.
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 You're not.
we're just going to go ahead and say, here are the things we added to the reconciliation list.
interested
Then
in
we can
funding.
discuss. We can
And then we'll
discuss it.
further discuss prioritization.
Absolutely. Yep,
Fine with me.
that's what I would do.
Okay.
Well, and with the CIP, they're not really on the reconciliation list. They're in until someone takes them out.
Right.
Which is why giving guidance might help. I mean,
But again, I think that the conversation
Is there
can
a risk
become more
that-
nuanced as you go through the budgeting process. It can happen in the next month or two.
Is there a risk to separating out tier 1 and tier 2 right now, as we've kind of somewhat gotten 2 votes for each, and then recognizing that we may need to further prioritize within tier 2? I mean, based on affordability constraints? It sounds like,
makes sense to
it
me.
just sounds like we had consensus, at least on that aspect, to do tier 1 and tier 2. And then, recognizing the fact that we may have to do further prioritization within tier 2 based on affordability constraints. I mean,
Yeah, I think we're all
I'd-
agreed about that.
yeah, so I mean, I would be most comfortable, I mean, if it's okay with the chair and my colleagues, but I'd be most comfortable sharing that as the current thinking of the committee, because that's where we are. I think that will provide the greatest level of transparency and, allow our colleagues to understand where we are based on the committee's recommendation, recognizing the fact that tier 2 may need to be, further worked out.
That's fine, I agree with that.
That seemed to be what Councilmember Jawando
yeah, that's
was
fine.
saying
I mean,
earlier.
obviously, we can all say, what we want to say to people prior to then and during next week, so that's fine. Yeah.
Well, I'll just clarify that Tier 1 is the Trails and Vision Zero, and Tier 2 is the rest of the funding items.
Obviously, just note the trails distinction that
Yeah, that
Yeah.
the natural trails is 2 to 1.
Right,
I shall
right.
do that.
for a more modest increase.
All
He'll
right.
help you with the language if you need. Okay, thank you.
Good. All right, thank you. One more thing I wanted to ask. When do we come back to talk about athletic fields, Pam?
I think you are coming back on March 24th, I believe, for a joint
March 24th.
ENC and PHED Committee meeting on ball fields, because, as you are aware, the CUP money discussion is being put closer to operating budget. That does prime you for operating budget. The Blair fields can be discussed then, other issues related to ball fields. If you have things that you want covered in that meeting, please send them to me soon. I'd like to get an outline for the staff report done very quickly and work with my colleague Vivian Yao on what she wants in that outline as well. So
Okay.
that'd be great.
One thing I would definitely love to get into more is the availability of competition level Little League and softball fields. It feels to me like the county has a commitment to providing first-rate basketball courts, indoor basketball, first-rate soccer and lacrosse and rectangular fields, and we provide Little League fields and softball fields, but it seems murky that whether there is a field with a mound and indoor grass and a fence, and even maybe a scoreboard. That is kind of that's the competition level field for Little League. I'm aware of really only 2 of those fields in the county, one at Germantown and one at North Chevy Chase. There might be others, I'm not sure, but I would love to see us think a little bit more about this issue, talk to some of the leagues. It seems to me that every softball league ought to have a home field that is, as nice as the field at Blair, for example, and they ought to have, every Little League ought to have a home field that is, has a mound and indoor grass and lights so that they can run at night, and water so they can keep the field maintained. But it doesn't seem to me that has been the policy of our county. Our county is not. We've sort of said we'll provide the neighborhood field, the diamond at your local school, but we won't necessarily provide the true Little League experience and a higher level softball experience. So I would just appreciate a little bit, push the envelope a little bit on that. Talk to some folks and see, come back. Let's talk about that when we take up the field's operating budget. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.